conference and bearing with me for a little bit to hear hopefully something exciting and, at least for some of you, rather new. Let me begin by briefly talking about what I refer to as the problem of social order. Imagine Robinson Crusoe alone on his island. Robinson Crusoe can do on his island whatever he wants. The problem of social cooperation, the problem of orderly human conduct simply does not arise for him. In order for this problem to arise, there needs to be a second person appearing on the scene. So Friday appears on the scene. Now imagine that this island is like the Garden of Eden. There exists a superabundance of goods. Everything is available for free, just as the air that we breathe is typically available for free. As long as this is the case, obviously no conflicts can arise between Robinson Crusoe and Friday, because whatever one person does, he never takes anything away from anyone else. The current supply of goods for him is as high as it was initially, and there are as many goods left over for Friday as they were before. A conflict between Robinson Crusoe and Friday can only arise insofar as goods are scarce, insofar as goods do not exist in superabundance. In the Garden of Eden, there exist only two things that are scarce, and only two types of conflicts can arise. What is scarce, even in the Garden of Eden, where there exists a superabundance of everything else, what is scarce in the Garden of Eden is, on the one hand, my own physical body, I have only one of it, and the standing room where my body rests. If Robinson Crusoe wants to do something with Friday's body, or Friday wants to do something with Robinson Crusoe's body, if Robinson Crusoe wants to stand exactly at the place where Friday stands, then a conflict arises because there is a scarcity of goods. And we would need, in the Garden of Eden, then also rules of peaceful human cooperation, of orderly human cooperation, in order to avoid these types of conflicts that I just characterized. And in the real world, which is characterized, of course, by all around scarcity, where everything is scarce, we would need rules that make it possible that conflicts can be avoided with respect to all sorts of scarce goods. Now, in the history of social and political thought, all sorts of, and this problem, how we arrange peaceful relations vis-à-vis scarce goods, is what I call the problem of social order. In the history of social thought, all sorts of proposals have been made how we solve this problem of social order. And because a multitude of proposals has been made, many people have thought there is no unique, no one correct solution to the problem of social order. But I want to argue that, yes, there exists one correct problem to the problem of social order. There exists one exact correct answer to the question, how can we avoid interpersonal conflicts given that there are scarcity of goods? Let me just outline briefly what the correct solution is. It is a solution that has been known for a long period of time. It has been somewhat refined in the course of the centuries, but the solution is rather simple, as you will recognize very quickly. Let me formulate first the solution for the Garden of Eden, for paradise. There we only need one rule, and that rule is everybody can do whatever he wants, can move around wherever he wants, occupy any place he wants, as long as no other body is standing at the same place. That is, or to formulate differently, we may place or move our own bodies wherever we want, provided only that no one else is already occupying or standing at a certain place. And outside of the Garden of Eden, that is in the real world of all-around scarcity, there are 4 interrelated rules that people need to follow in order to avoid all sorts of conflicts. The first one is, every person is the exclusive owner of its own physical body. I can do with my body whatever I want. Nobody is permitted to interfere with it. If I want to do something to somebody else, then I need this other person's permission to do this. That's the first rule. We can immediately see that there are intuitively no other alternatives. Who else should be the owner of my physical body except me? Who else should own Robinson Crusoe except Robinson Crusoe? Should Friday own him? Or should Friday and Robinson Crusoe own each others jointly? But then immediately you see that this does not avoid conflicts, that causes conflicts. It makes conflicts, so to speak, permanent. The second rule is, every person is the private or exclusive owner of all nature-given resources or goods that he has perceived as scarce and appropriated for the very first time. You can also formulate this rule, he who uses something that was previously unowned for the very first time becomes the owner of this thing. Again, the alternatives would be, who else should own it? Somebody who was not the first one who does something to something else? The second one? Or the second and the first one together? And immediately we recognize again that the alternative rules would not avoid conflicts, but they would make conflict, in fact, permanent. And the third and fourth rule follow basically from the first and second. That is, every person who, with the help of his body and those things that he appropriated for the first time, produces something new, becomes the owner of what he has produced, as long as he does not physically damage the property of others in the course of producing what he has produced. And the fourth rule is, once a good has been first appropriated or has been produced, ownership in such a good can only be acquired by a voluntary transfer from a previous owner to a later owner. Those are all the rules. If we would follow these rules, then all conflicts could be avoided and we would have eternal peace, so to speak. Cooperation would always go on in a completely smooth way. I can spare myself the task of giving some detailed justification of these rules. I have done that in various writings of myself, but I trust that you intuitively sense that we in our daily lives, by and large, recognize these rules and act according to these rules anyhow. Now, let me emphasize, however, this. Contrary to the frequently heard claim that the institution of private property, as I described it, private property in bodies, private property in previously unowned things, and so forth, in contrast to the frequently heard claim that private property is just a convention, I want to emphasize that this is definitely not the case. A convention serves a purpose, and a convention is characterized by the fact that there exists an alternative to it. For instance, the Latin alphabet, which we use, serves the purpose of written communication. And there exists an alternative to it. We have, for instance, a Cyrillic alphabet that we can use instead of using the Latin alphabet. What, however, is the purpose of norms? What is the purpose of rules? And the answer is, if there were no interpersonal conflicts whatsoever, then we would not need any rules whatsoever. We only need rules, we only need social norms because there are conflicts in this world. And the purpose of norms or rules is to avoid otherwise unavoidable conflict. A norm that would generate conflict, that creates conflicts, is contrary to the very purpose of a norm or a rule. Or we can also say a norm that creates conflicts is a perversion instead of is what a rule is supposed to do, namely to help us avoid conflicts. And with regard to the purpose of conflict avoidance, then the institution of private property is definitely not just a convention, because no alternative to it exists. Only private or exclusive property makes it possible that all otherwise unavoidable conflicts can be avoided. And only the principle of property acquisition by acts of original appropriation, that is, of appropriating something that was previously unowned, makes it possible that conflicts can be avoided from the beginning of mankind on, so to speak, until its very end. Because the first appropriator of something did not involve anyone in any conflict. He was the first one. Nobody else was there. So the first appropriation of something as private property is a conflict-free way of transferring something was previously some external thing into something that is private property. Now, the next problem I want to address is the problem of the enforcement of social order and the protection of private property rights. Now, even if people recognize, so to speak, the validity of the rules that I have explained, and even though we might know how to avoid all conflicts, it is still possible that some people simply do not care. That you say, oh, I know how to avoid conflicts, but I don't want to avoid conflict. I hope to personally benefit by being involved in conflicts with other people. So what every society needs is, of course, also institutions and mechanisms that enforce these rules, that deal with norm breakers, with rule breakers who simply do not behave in a civilized manner. How do we accomplish this task? That is, how do we deal with murderers and rapists and robbers and the normal criminal folks that we are all familiar with? Who is supposed to make sure that these people are brought to order? The standard answer that is given to this question, the answer that is also given, for instance, by Ludwig von Mises to this question is, this is the task of the state. That is, the enforcement of law and order is the first and primary duty of the state. Now, whether this answer is correct or not depends on how is the state defined. And I give you the standard definition of the state, not some crazy definition that I have come up with, but this definition that you find in almost every textbook. What is a state? And the definition is the state is an agency that is characterized by two unique characteristics. First, the state is an agency that exercises a territorial monopoly of ultimate decision-making. In every case of conflict, the state is the institution that decides who is right and who is wrong. And there is no appeal beyond the state. Nobody is above the state. And the implications of this will become clear as I go on. This also means the state is the ultimate arbiter in every case of conflict that involves the state itself. That is, if the state or the state agents are involved in a conflict with other people, the state or agents of the state decide who is right and who is wrong in those types of conflicts also. And the second unique characteristic of the state is a territorial monopolist of taxation. It can unilaterally determine what people must pay to the state for performing this function of being the ultimate judge in every case of conflict. Now, as widespread as the standard view regarding the necessity of the institution of the state as a provider of law and order is, it stands in clear contradiction to elementary economic and moral laws and principles. Let me explain this quickly. Among economists and philosophers, there are two propositions that are almost universally agree to. The first one is, every monopoly is bad from the viewpoint of consumers, not from the viewpoint of the producers. Every producer loves to be a monopolist. But from the viewpoint of consumers, monopolies are bad for the following reason. Monopoly is defined as, in the classical meaning, as a firm that has an exclusive privilege. I, firm A, am the only one who is allowed to produce a certain product. No one else is allowed to produce this product or service except me. Why is that bad from the point of view of consumers? It's easy to predict. It is bad from the viewpoint of consumers because shielded from potential competitors, the price for this good or service will be higher than it otherwise would be, and the quality of this good or service will be lower than it otherwise would be. And the second statement on which almost all philosophers and economists agree is the production of law and order, that is, the enforcement of laws, or the production of security, is the primary function of the state, and the state is defined, as I just explained before, as a territorial monopolist of ultimate decision-making. Now, obviously, both of these statements are incompatible. That is, they contradict each other. Monopoly is bad on the one hand, but for the production of security, we need a monopolist. We need the state. Now, most philosophers and economists don't even bother about this contradiction. They don't seem to be even aware of this contradiction. And if they are made aware of it, or if they somehow themselves recognize there is some contradiction between the two statements, then the usual way out is to say, then there is something wrong with the statement that all monopolies are bad, and we stick to the proposition that law and order must be provided by a monopolist. That is, they find fault not with the first proposition, fault with the first proposition, but not with the second proposition. Instead, I want to just argue it is exactly the other way around. The proposition about monopolies is bad is true. The proposition about the state having to be a monopolist in order to enforce law and order is actually false. As a territorial monopolist of ultimate decision-making, and law enforcement. The state is not just like any other monopolist, that is such as a milk monopolist or a car monopolist who produces milk at too high prices and too low quality, or cars at too high prices and too low quality. In contrast to all other monopolists, the state is not only an institution that produces inferior goods, bad goods, low quality goods, but it actually produces bads. That is to say, goods that are not really goods at all, what we call bads. In fact, the state must first produce bads, especially in the form of taxation, which are obviously not a good. I'm not screaming, come on, do me something good and take taxes from me. It's obviously not a good. So the state, in order to do anything good at all, or something that looks like it might be a good, must first do something bad in order to then do something good. Now, if an agency is the ultimate judge in every case of conflict, then it is also, as I already indicated, the judge in all cases of conflict involving the state itself. A monopolist of ultimate decision-making then will not just prevent conflicts and arbitrate so that conflicts are resolved. If you can decide who is right and wrong in every case, even in cases involving yourself, then you will provoke and cause conflicts, and then, of course, decide these conflicts in your own favor. To use a drastic example, I hit you on the head, then you complain that why did you hit me on the head? And then I say, okay, I'm the judge in this case, and I tell you that you looked at me in a very strange way, and I had the feeling that I had to hit you on the head. And now you have to just pay me also on top of it, because I made this very just verdict that you deserved to be hit on the head by myself. It should also be clear that constitutions or Supreme Courts or something like this do not change anything in this regard. Because Supreme Courts or constitutions need to be interpreted also. By whom are they interpreted? They are interpreted by employees of the same organization that caused the conflict in the first case, and it is of course predictable that they will by and large always decide in favor of the state itself. After all, they are agents of this agency themselves. What we can then predict is, instead of recognizing private property rights and laws that are eternally the same, states will substitute legislation for law. That is, they make the law. They make laws that say, it is all right if I hit you on the head sometimes. In addition, as the ultimate judge, the state is also a monopolist of taxation. That is, it can unilaterally determine, without the consent of those that are affected by it, what its subjects must pay for this service that the state, alleged service that the state provides. In other words, the state is, by definition, an expropriating property protector. You realize that is obviously a contradiction in terms. And then motivated like everyone else by the idea that the more money I can spend, the better off I am, and the less I work, the less I really have to work for something, the better off I am also. It is predictable that the amount of taxes collected will continuously increase, and the protection offered, the protection of life and property by the state, will continuously go down. For the state, the best thing is to maximize expenditure on what they call protection of life and property, and in fact minimize the actual production of protection of life and property.